Now, finance ministers from the G7 group of wealthy nations are meeting in Japan for talks on issues ranging from support for Ukraine to concerns over the state of the international banking system. Overshadowing the talks, however, is the looming threat of a debt default in the United States. Lawmakers in the country are currently wrangling to agree on a plan to raise the amount of money the government can borrow. If no deal can be reached by June 1st, the economic repercussions could be enormous. But what exactly is the debt ceiling and why does it matter so much? Our reporter Andrea Nipori explains.
The debt ceiling is the maximum amount the US government can borrow by issuing bonds. Back in January, the White House reached the current limit of $31.4 trillion. The US Treasury resorted to other extraordinary measures to ensure the government could meet its obligations. If the ceiling isn't raised in time by the Congress, the US risks defaulting on its debt. Chaos in the markets would ensue, and the economy would slow down. Hundreds of thousands of jobs could also be at risk, as it would be hard to avoid a recession.
It's Congress's job to do this. If they fail to do it, we will have an economic and financial catastrophe that will be of our own making. And there is no action that President Biden and the U.S. Treasury can take to prevent that catastrophe.
The debt ceiling has been raised 78 times since 1960, usually with bipartisan support. Still, conflict on the topic between the White House and Congress is nothing new. Back in 2011, President Obama had to make harsh concessions to Republicans. They approved the debt ceiling raise only in exchange for sweeping budget cuts. As a result of that stall, the credit rating of the US was downgraded for the first time in the country's history.
Let's talk more about this with Professor Gerald Cohen. He's the chief economist at the Keenan Institute of Private Enterprise at the University of North Carolina. Professor Cohen, as we saw there, the debt ceiling has been raised 78 times already. Is it conceivable to you that this time could be different?
I would surely hope that it isn't. I think that it would be a huge mistake not to raise the debt ceiling. The United States is one of a handful of countries that seems to have this very odd situation where we decide to spend the money and tax, but then don't think about the implications of that until we get to the debt limit. So it would be disastrous if we didn't raise the debt ceiling, but you never know. I think the probabilities, will come to the edge as we do every time in the last or many times, and we'll ultimately pass something. But you never know.
It can seem like an odd annual ritual from the outside, but the Republicans are looking for deep spending cuts in exchange for their support. What exactly are they demanding?
So I think they're looking at a combination of spending that, they don't believe is beneficial to the economy. Things where we did COVID spending, some questions about infrastructure or the way the infrastructure is being spent. And then they're looking at long-term questions about healthcare, social insurance. And so it's a combination of kind of both near or relative near-term spending and long-term spending. And I think, we need to have a conversation about spending. The United States we've been very profligate. We're not raising as much, we have these very high debts. It's a combination. It's both parties' fault. Republicans want to cut taxes. Democrats want to spend more. And you get that combination of we're saying, well, we'll do both. And that doesn't work. And then we have looming large deficits in Social Security, in healthcare spending as the population is growing. And so we should have a conversation around these issues. We need that conversation, but we shouldn't be doing it, as a way. It shouldn't be forced by, we could potentially default. That would be disastrous.
And just outline to me what the immediate impact would be if there's no deal by the 1st of June.
I mean, the United States would effectively default on some payment. It may not be a debt payment. It would be a payment to some contractor. It could be, and one of the things when I was at Treasury, we found we could not. You can't choose to pay the debt and not pay a contractor or not pay Social Security payments. There's no option to do that. So it would mean that there's an obligation that the United States government had, and we didn't pay it. And then people would say, well, why are we any different from Argentina, which has defaulted multiple times? And we're seeing that, we saw that in 2011 when S&P downgraded the United States. We are seen as the risk-free measure. Like we pay our debts. And the idea that we wouldn't means that interest rates would be substantially higher for everybody everybody in the United States and potentially globally, because we're seen as the safest credit. And if the safest credit doesn't pay it doesn't pay what's due, then there's going to be a risk premium. The interest rate that you pay is going to be higher, and that would be disastrous for the economy. I mean, everybody needs, households borrow money for mortgages to buy a car. Companies borrow money to expand, even sometimes to just pay their people, because cash flows sometimes don't match, money coming in doesn't match money going out. And all of that would be higher. The cost of doing all of that would be higher.
And on that question of interest rates, the discussion this year is, of course, happening against the backdrop of very high inflation. How much is that playing into discussions?
I mean, the challenge is that if there is my guess is the compromise, and this is just a guess, is going to be that there is going to be some austerity that will be put in place. And the challenge is that the lesson we learned, that's what happened in 2011 as part of the compromise. And what happened, though, was that we were coming out of a recession from the global financial crisis, and the recovery was very slow. And we regretted that, or in retrospect, it slowed down our recovery. This is a bit of a different situation. If you believe that the economy is still growing too quickly, then the fiscal austerity could be beneficial. But I actually believe that we're headed to a recession, and in the next 6 to 12 months, not now, but in the next 6 to 12 months. And so that austerity would be coming in at the wrong time, because it would be slowing the economy when we're already in a recession. And so the timing could be really harmful for the American economy. Even if we come to an agreement, interest rates aren't affected, but if we have austerity, that could be harmful to the economy just at the wrong time.
You mentioned earlier that you were concerned about the rate of US government spending. Do you think there's any prospect of the credit rating being lowered, even if there's no default? In some respects, yes, because we do have these very large looming deficits, and if a credit, and I guess the question is, do credit agencies say we're ultimately going to deal with that, or do they say they're so large that we're not going to be able to deal with that? And so there are two things. You could have, what happened in 2011 is we managed to come to an agreement, but S&P said there's such political risks around this. We just think it could happen potentially in the future. And so there could be a downgrade from that, even though we passed, even though we managed to increase the debt limit, we're seen as so politically challenged that we may not be able to do it again. And so there could be a downgrade. I mean, if we default, there will be a downgrade. And then there would be potentially a downgrade for them to say, look, you're not dealing with a long-term fiscal. All you're doing is you're talking about it when there's the debt through the debt limit, but once the debt limit gets dealt with,
you're not dealing with a long-term fiscal, and then there could be a downgrade because of that.
All right, we'll be watching those developments very carefully. Professor Gerald Cohen from the Keenan Institute of Private Enterprise, thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to chat with you.